Benny Goodman and his music.
All right, here we go. Good evening, everybody. Me and the whole crew here. See Miles is back there in the in one of his boxes. Where are you?
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Evening, Marie, Kathleen, Timothy, Jim. Hey, Cindy in Detroit. Hope everybody's got their shovel on. Miles, you want to come hang out? I see you over there. Where's the baby? Bring out the baby. Hey, Luann, Susan. Hey, everybody. Remember, where's Orange Mouse? Where'd Orange Mouse go? Here then, everybody, the Embers. I like that. Very playful kitten, but she's a little sleepy right now. Well, a little. Back behind the boxes there. Evening, Octavio. Hey, Bridget, Timothy. Sound could be a little higher, yeah. We'll try that. That's still not good. It's also only coming in kind of weird. Oh, no. We'll try that. Huh. All right, how's that? Is that a little bit better? Still seems like it's coming in mono instead of stereo. I don't know why that is. Partly because this is such an old deck, perhaps.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Hey, Kathleen, so no euphoniums tonight. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Luann. Oh, how the while and wherefore. Elaine, I will always cue ice cream. I went and tried Jenny's new opaque ice cream today, which tastes like Oreo with a hint of cherry. Hey, Geraldine Floresita. See some of you tomorrow night. Hey, Charisse. Yep. Just like in the olden days. Grave Robbing 101 was one of the first ones that we did. Virtually. Hey, Dad. Where'd my cats go? Oh, I see. Miles is down here. In the hall. Ember is under the table. I would write a song the day you came along. Kathleen. Evening, everybody. I'll tell the stars above you. Oh, say again, I love you. All my heart. Evening, one and all. Welcome to Mysterious Chicago, Grave Robbing 101. Hey, Karen. Hey, Laura. Hey, everybody. We've got an effing meeting. We're going to plot out some Mystericon stuff this weekend as well. Hey, Molly. Yeah, we haven't done Grave Robbing 101 virtually in years now. Yeah, and Tomb Snoopers is coming soon. Have the picture for that up shortly. I am drinking a Manhattan.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Spent the afternoon in the microfilm room, got some interesting stuff, but not what I was hoping to find. Confirmation of a couple of Houdini appearances in Chicago. It's weird how little his appearances made the news. Like the big ones. Eating Tootsies out of a vampire's butt. Megan, are you okay? Where are you hanging out tonight? Laura, we do have Grave Robbing 102. That is the Great Merchant Caper, all about the A.S. Stewart robbery. Maybe we'll do that next week. Widow Jane, a bourbon from Brooklyn. I'm down. Again, I really am going to need a little more information here. I hope he had a good birthday anyway. Hey Sue, hey Keely, hey Janice, hey Grandma Bell. Got a couple of new things that I want to add in tomorrow. That's kind of where I'm at. I got to get on the computer later and add the pictures in. Hey, formerly Homeless Satanist over on Twitch. Formerly Unhoused. I had somebody come and give me a whole lecture about my use of the term hobo when talking about Captain Streeter. I didn't contextualize it enough in the boat tour. Hey, Wolfie. Okay, Vampire Pinata. So, okay, you're taking it out of the butt and then eating it. You're not, like, going direct from the source. All right. Hey, Matthew. We're going to give Benny Goodman one more tune here. Then we can start up properly.
They all loved it. They all loved those fast ones when they played by Benny Goodman.
I don't have a shovel anymore. I used to use my upstairs neighbor's shovel. Not there anymore. I don't really need a shovel here, other than for props. Hey, Beth. Benny Goodman finish up one more tune, everybody, then we are going to do Grave Robbing 101. Hey, Jan. Hey, Lori. Hey, everybody. And other Lori. We got multiple Loris right in a row there. We get that with Karen's and Laura's and Joanne's. Occasionally Jim's. Hey, Eileen. Maybe shovel or spade. Well, Timothy, you want to use a wooden one in either case. Hey, Diane. This is just to lubricate my throat, honestly. I've been singing Billy Joel karaoke in the living room, and that guy's register is just different from mine. It is hard. Those songs are hard. I can sing them just fine if I'm not singing along to something, and I can sing in whatever key I feel like. Yes, there's only one Octavio. Hey, Steve, what's shaking is my hand right about now. All right, that is coming from the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, which kind of reminds me that I really ought to go ahead and plug. Where's the graphic for this? I forgot to add the graphic for this. Really ought to plug coming soon next month. Mystericon 25. Make sure you are registered now over at Mystericon.com. It is in the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, right where Benny Goodman was playing for just a minute ago there. It's my best attempt at reproducing a Blue Note style album cover. But all right, welcome along, everybody. It is time. It's time once again for Grave Robbing 101 right here from Mysterious Chicago. This is a tour that I run both in Chicago and in New York City. The stories are quite a bit different there, but the tips and tricks for how to rob a grave, very similar. Just got to do some in Boston, too. Took the kids, a school group in Boston on the Freedom Trail. They talked about grave robbing in the old Granary Burial Ground, which is a really interesting place. In fact, Granary Burial Ground is where I got the tombstone with this soul effigy that looks like me, for Tomb Snoopers. This is the new podcast that I will be doing with Patty Vasquez co-hosting with me, writing Sidecar, as I go into deep digs into old historical mysteries. The first season is going to be all about Johann Hawk. We'll talk about it all in just a second here. I should really introduce myself properly. Welcome along to Mysterious Chicago. I'm Adam Seltzer. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, and coming next month, Chicago's Serial Husband, The Marriages and Murders of Johann Hawk. Author's copies should be arriving for me tomorrow. I'm actually going to have the Johann Hawk book in my hand. And so, coming up next month as well, Tomb Snoopers. Now, they gave me a pretty tight word limit on that book. I've been wanting to do a new podcast for a while and kind of expand the reach of the people that we have here. So, brand new podcast coming out. We are going to dig deep and talk about what kind of research goes into finding this stuff. There's so many things about Johann Hawk. He's been written up in like anthologies of murder encyclopedias for years, but the story's been a hopeless jumble ever since 1905. Using modern techniques, you can actually find quite a bit. And I don't mean, hey, hi, I asked AI to write me a biography of of Johann Hawk, and it made a mistake in the second word. So there's still a lot of times when you have to go really into the archives to research. You have to peek into the mausoleums. You have to go to the microfilm room. You have to go digging through crusty old Victorian paperwork. This is the kind of stuff I like the best. But tonight, well, there is some indication that Johann Hawk may have dug up a grave in West Virginia one time. I'm not entirely sure that I believe it, but it's entirely possible. So, and that was the case, it was to steal a couple of internal organs so that nobody could tell that there was arsenic poisoning. It was hardly necessary to do, seems like a whole lot of trouble, but we are going to be talking today about grave robbing, one of my favorite topics. I've been teaching this in Chicago and New York. This was one of the first virtual presentations that I put together. So, to begin with, we have to talk about my favorite grave robber, one here in Chicago by the name of Dr. A.J. Baxter. Now, Dr. A.J. Baxter was robbing the Old City Cemetery in Chicago back in the 1850s. He said in those days, people were simply not dying in Chicago with any creditable rapidity. Perhaps they were too busy. But medical science could not be allowed to suffer, therefore I was perforce compelled to become a bold and burking resurrection man. Now, here at Grave Robbing 101, we have got to talk a little bit about these terms he used. Resurrection man. That was another name for a grave robber. One resurrected the bodies out of their grave. Miles, you got a hairball back there? It's okay, just get it on out. Get it on out. Other names for grave robbers included body snatcher. That one came up quite a bit. Ghoul is a very interesting word. Originally it meant one who ate dead bodies, then it became one who stole dead bodies, and now it's really just kind of a catch-all term that means the same thing as goblin, ghost, etc. Professional subject gatherer is what you might call yourself if you were selling dead bodies to medical schools. Now, we should really point out, a lot of people when they think grave robbing think jewelry. But very rarely, by the 1800s, almost nobody was buried with anything valuable, partly because they were so afraid of grave robbers. But medical schools are really who was buying all the dead bodies. If somebody was digging up a grave, it was almost certainly to sell the body to a medical school. Professional subject gatherer sounded classier than body snatcher. And you could make pretty good money at this, too. In peak seasons, colleges were paying $30 to $50 per corpse. And a good grave robber could get 5 or 6 of them in one night. One of my other favorites that I have seen is purveyor of meat, specializing in long pig. That'd be a corpse. One thing that Dr. Baxter said was a bold and burking resurrection man. He opened his quote by saying, well, these starched and ramroddy medical professors of today would have their eyes open if they saw what we boys got up to back in the 60s. He meant the 1860s, but I really want to imagine him saying, back in the 60s, man. He was a bold and burking resurrection man. Burking. I hope he didn't mean this in the literal sense. Bold and burking. Burking refers to Burke and Hare, a couple of grave robbers from Edinburgh. There is now a strip club named after them, right in what is known as the Pubic Triangle in Edinburgh. I was there in Edinburgh. You can't really walk through downtown without passing through the Pubic Triangle. You kind of blink and you miss it. Burke and Hare just looks like a regular old tavern. These guys started out robbing graves for Dr. Knox. However, if you dug them up after a couple of days, they wouldn't be in very good condition, and you sure don't want that. They found that they could save themselves a lot of digging by simply killing people to sell their bodies to the medical schools. Burking was their method of execution. It was a way of killing the body by pressing down on the chest until they suffocate, which leaves the body in very good condition for the medical schools. So one hopes that Dr. Baxter was not really doing this. But now we have learned some vocabulary. Let's go on and bust in a little bit to grave robbing history. Those of you who are coming in late and have to be marked as tardy, I will have to put that on your permanent record. But again, this is Grave Robbing 101. If you want Dr. Scott's Science Refresher course, that is down the hall to the left and a step to the right. Let's go to New York City to start talking here. Down in New York City is Trinity Churchyard, subject of another book that I have written, which comes up quite a bit. Trinity is a burial ground that goes back to about the late 1600s. Well, this is the southern portion of the church, which is a little bit newer and a little bit more formalized than the northern part. But there's a lot of very strange epitaphs. These are very interesting. If you're used to Chicago gravestones, I didn't even see too much of this in Boston. But you see these things like, when the Lord sees fit to end my time, with thy beloved dust I'll mingle mine. That's what it says down on the bottom. Mary, thy love to James were known. The want of thee he does bemoan. Like it switches from he to I midway through. It's like James misses you, but I'm the one who is going to mingle my dust with yours. These are really terrible poems on these gravestones, honestly. Eventually, by the 1820s, everybody thought they were terribly embarrassing. Of course, Trinity is probably best known today for being the burial place of Alexander Hamilton, also Eliza, his wife, and probably Philip, their son. Well, definitely Philip, their son. We just don't know exactly where he is. Frankly, they don't know where very many people are in here to begin with. But I always liked this particular picture. You can see Eliza is in front. You got Alexander right here. And if you angle the shot just right, as I have done here, you can get Alexander and Eliza and this shoe store that is not entirely confident in the background. We are probably the lowest priced in the city. But let us move back to 1788. When this was published in the New York newspapers, $100 reward, whereas one night last week, and it looks like laughed week because they're using the long S here, the grave of a person recently interred in Trinity Churchyard was open, and the corpse with part of the clothes were carried off. Any person who will discover the offenders so that they may be convicted and brought to justice will receive the above reward from the Corporation of Trinity Church, by order of the vestry, Robert C. Livingston, Treasurer. I will point out the long S that looks like an F. The rules for it varied so much that they're practically arbitrary. So one thing you might note here is that they took part of the clothes away too. This was a thing, there wasn't necessarily a law against taking away a dead body, but if you took the clothes, they could get you for stealing those. So a few things that you need to bring with you, some tools of the trade. These are part of our tips and tricks. One of the tools to bring along is a knife to cut off the clothes. If you leave the clothes behind, you're in better shape legally. Also, if you remember to rebury the clothes, not leave them lying around outside of the grave, people are less apt to realize that a grave has been disturbed. That is a tip, kid. Write it down. So you can see people took this fairly seriously. At the time that this ad was published, there had been letters back and forth in the New York papers between people who supported grave robbing and people who were against it. But in general, most people thought they were only getting bodies from what is now called the African American burial ground a few blocks north. However, one day they found that they started finding Trinity had been disturbed as well, and then came the Doctors' Riot. See, this is the old King's College. It's down, no longer called King's, eventually came to be called Columbia, right where City Hall Park is right now. So, exactly how the Great Riot against doctors started is not entirely well known. There's a lot of different accounts, but never really by somebody who was actually there. But it was something like some kids were playing in the yard outside of this college, and all of a sudden they saw a medical school waving a disembodied arm out of an upstairs window. One of the kids playing had recently lost his mother, and said, "Is that my mother's arm?" To which the medical student replied, "Yes, she's coming back to slap you again." They ran off to find their parents, who started a whole mob to run in and retrieve all of the corpses and cadavers. Now, whether this is actually how it went down, I kind of doubt it. This is approximately the kind of sense of humor that medical students tend to have at the time. It's quite likely somebody thought they saw something. Some of the details that were written in, I have a little bit of my doubts about. But people rounded up all of the people they could find. They busted in to the medical school and started trying to bust up the cadavers. There are a couple of first-hand accounts of this. The hospital apartments were ransacked. In the anatomy room were found 3 fresh bodies, one boiling in a kettle, and 2 others cutting up with certain parts of the 2 sexes hanging up in a most brutal position. In a little time, near 2,000 men were collected round the hospital to see a scene which struck with horror the most hardened wretch. Anatomies hanging, different parts of bodies, eyes, etc., coffins filled with excrements, a hogshead filled with bones in a pickle, parts of bodies in large kettles boiling, here and there a head, an arm, a leg, a heart, a long table, bloody knives, and a horrid, nauseous sense. Among the doctors working that day were Dr. Charles McKnight, who had been George Washington's physician. The mayor got all of the soldiers he could together from the local militias and tried to put down this mob, who was able to cart off much of the cadavers and had them buried over at St. Paul's Church across the street. So as they were running, though, they tried to attack any doctor they could. Coming up right up this road, David Hossick, who would later become Alexander Hamilton's doctor, was struck in the head with a rock. Hamilton himself was probably among the people who tried to put the mob down, but it's difficult to say for sure. The contemporary accounts don't really mention him. Later accounts do, a couple of things that his son wrote do. And also, one of his children was actually born the night this happened. So I can imagine the other kids might have known all about it, because every time the anniversary came around, every time that kid had a birthday, you could imagine Eliza telling the story. So there I was, in labor. Your father goes to run off to protect a bunch of grave robbers. Now, one enduring legend of this riot is that this half-literate mob found the home of Sir John Temple, who was the British consulate, and sounding out the name, they thought it said Surgeon Temple, and very nearly busted in to beat the guy up. Now, the mob kind of petered out after a couple of days. Once they managed to break into the jail where the doctors had been hidden, they didn't really know what to do and couldn't get through the bars anyway. So it all sort of petered out, but by some metrics, this was the first riot in United States history. It was in this brief period after we'd become a country, but before we had a constitution. The next day, there was a letter to the editor that I found in the papers. It was possibly written by Hamilton himself, telling people, no, you don't have to resort to mob violence. We already have laws about that. We may not have a constitution yet, but we're still bound by laws in this country, and grave robbing is illegal. Whether it really was or not is kind of up to who you talk to. But more tips and tricks. Now, one thing that these guys did not seem to have known was that if you want to rob a grave, the first thing to do is always bribe the sexton. Now, the sexton was like the cemetery manager. You can see him here in this illustration by Fizz, who did most of the Dickens books. This is from Sketches by Bose. So, even here in Chicago, the sexton was known to take bribes, the border ruffian. There was a big debate about whether the city sexton was a Republican or a Democrat at the time. But the sexton was like the cemetery manager. Every time you see them in things like a Dickens book, they're drunk and corrupt and willing to take bribes to show people where to dig. It was probably pretty much true. It was certainly the case in Chicago, where even like the lowest government ladder, we still already had these guys. Let us move along here. So, one thing you also have to watch out for is that other people may have come up with preventative things. Let's go ahead and check out in Chicago here. Chicago, this is the tomb of Ira Couch, which never got moved from the old city cemetery. So, this is the tomb of Ira Couch. Most likely everything inside it is long since rotted away, unless Mr. Couch himself was interred in a Fisk metallic burial case. These really ornate metal coffins with a viewing window over the face that were supposed to preserve your body forever. They weren't just to preserve people or to cash in on the ancient Egypt craze of the day. There's also the case that these were thought to be harder for grave robbers to break into. Now, people were trying all kinds of things in these days that you as a grave robber are going to have to watch out for. Besides metal burial cases, there were also things like exploding charges that could be buried along with you. These were basically bombs that were dug into the ground. There were a couple of attempts at trying them out. I don't know if they ever actually worked. At one point, they tried to have a horse trample over one of the graves and noticed like tiny disturbance in the ground. More commonly, you hear about stuff like mort safes. These are cages that are put on top of the grave to make it harder for people to dig down. If you've never heard of slant drilling, grave robbers could still get through these things. They could just get in at an angle. Now, since we're talking about the Couch tomb, though, we don't really know what is inside of this place. However, this is where we get the title for the podcast. This is the Tomb Snooper 500, a device that I use to go underneath the door and see what's inside. Now there are better pictures of this from when they did some restoration work a couple of years ago. We'll take a look inside here. Sometimes you don't rob the grave, you just snoop in it. So what's behind the door is another door. But no matter how much they tried to do to keep grave robbers out, one thing I often ask people is, so the Couch tomb, does this seem like it would be a good grave to rob? Generally, the answer to this would be no. It's got some tree cover, but you're surrounded by high-rises right now. Generally, mausoleums were harder to break into without really leaving any kind of a disturbance. But a determined grave robber could still pull it off, as in the case over in Ohio of the Harrison tomb. This is the tomb of William Henry Harrison, the guy who was president for about 30 days before he died. And so here we've got how it looked originally before they built it all up. And here's a look at the inside of it. Here you can see the large slab for William Henry Harrison, the president. Over on the left, from 1804 to 1878, you can see John Scott Harrison. So John Scott Harrison was the father of William Henry Harrison, or the son of William Henry Harrison, and the father of Benjamin Harrison, who would also be president. These guys are distantly related to the Carter Harrisons of Chicago. So John Scott Harrison died in 1878. When they were taking him to be interred here, they noticed another grave nearby of a cousin had been disturbed. They thought, oh, they must have taken him to the University of Cincinnati. Let's get John Scott Harrison interred, then we're going to go find that corpse. So they put him here behind the slab and made their way out to the University of Cincinnati, where they found the body of John Scott Harrison had already been grave robbed right out from under their noses and beaten them to the college. This was one of the more famous cases in the case. Of course, there were more publicized cases at the time, for instance, that of A.T. Stewart. Now, this is the subject for Grave Robbing 102, which we might do next week. Now, over at St. Mark's in the Bowery in New York, if you walk around the graveyard there, even now, it's just markers like this. They've also got one for Sam Shepard, who has a show running in Aurora right this second. True West is on right now. Allen Ginsberg has a marker here. But most of it are these little slabs that lead to underground vaults. 1878, A.T. Stewart, the merchant king of New York, who operated the Marble Palace just above City Hall Park, was stolen out of his grave and held for ransom. Now, this ended up being a major story. They never did figure out if they actually recovered the bones or not. The family got like a bag of bones, but they had no way of knowing whether it was actually his. And for quite a lot less than they thought they were going to get. See, here's the thing. If you rob a grave intending to hold it for ransom, what do you do if they decide they're not going to pay? Like, you can call it, it's all very well to say, I want $20,000 for the bones. And they say, well, how about $2,000? What are you going to do? Just hang on to it? Find another buyer? There ain't another buyer. You end up kind of being quite literally stuck with a bag, and that bag has a corpse in it that probably smells terrible. Around the same time, 1876, there had been a case where Abraham Lincoln's body was nearly stolen. That's a whole other story in and of itself as well. It may have inspired Robert Todd Lincoln to, as the executor of the Pullman estate, to have Mr. Pullman buried under 10 feet of cement, steel, and railroad ties, which may or may not actually be true. We're still not really sure at Graceland Cemetery, but that was widely reported. Other cases. I don't know why I have this in the deck. There's a more recent case. Digging up H.H. Holmes back at about 2016. That's how he was looking by then. Let's talk some tools a little bit more. One kind of tool you were going to need for this sort of thing is a wooden shovel. Wooden shovels made less noise. Those aren't the easiest thing to get, but you can. Also, a tip that you really do need to know is you don't have to dig up the entire grave. Now, most of these people who were digging up bodies like A.T. Stewart or John Scott Harrison must have been practiced professionals. They were getting bodies out from behind slabs. If you're getting things out of the ground, you have to be able to dig very quickly. But the most important thing to know is you don't have to dig up the entire grave. This is a rookie mistake. Like when Charles Dickens wrote about grave robbing, he had them hauling the whole coffin up out of the ground. He made so many mistakes. So all you really had to do to dig up a grave was dig a hole down to the head of the coffin, then cut a hole into the head of the coffin using your handy-dandy axe, and then take a rope and a hook. These are some other tools you're going to need. So you didn't really have to dig all the coffin out. You would just dig a hole into the head of the coffin, then put a hook through the eyes and drag the body up on a rope. The more you know. By cutting back on your digging, working smarter, not harder, you can save yourself quite a lot of work, and a really good grave robber could get 5 or 6 corpses in one night. Say, why fire up the machine if you're only going to make one pancake, right? Now, some people who didn't know that but have a very well-documented story are a few guys who worked at the old Chicago Medical School, no relation to the current one. So this is Lincoln Park, right about at the site of the Dead House. Now, the dead house was the place where they would bury, but where they would store bodies until they could be buried. Now, the Chicago Medical School never seemed to be able to get enough corpses. Whereas Rush Medical School down the block was able to get all the corpses they wanted to. There were stories about students there using human bones as drums while they sang drinking songs in Latin. They were the in this particular metaphor, they were the snotty rich kids camp across the lake from the scrappy band of misfits at the camp known as the Chicago Medical School. Now, they decided at one point that we've got to show those rich jerks up and get some more corpses of our own. Now, this was right at the time of the Civil War. There was a Confederate prisoner of war camp down on the south side of town, and one of the students got word that a fresh batch of corpses were going to be delivered to the dead house from Camp Douglas. They thought, all right, why don't we get together and steal some corpses? We can get all the equipment we need. They borrowed a carriage from somebody's dad. Then as they started driving up towards it, they thought, we can't just park a carriage outside of the cemetery. Everybody's going to know exactly what we're doing. So they found a stable a couple of blocks away. They asked, hey, we need to park this carriage for a little bit. To which the owner said, going to go rob some graves, are you? So knowing exactly what they were doing, he charged them an exorbitant sum. But once they had got parked, they walked up here to the dead house and found that there was a Union soldier deputized to guard the Confederate dead that had been laid out on the sidewalk. They noticed that as he walked back and forth, he kept getting further and further away from the corpses, but realized they were not going to get past him. And most of the people started saying, hey, why don't we just give up? But one of them made a whole speech. I imagine it was very much like Bill Murray's speech in Meatballs the night before the end of the Camp Olympics, saying, this is for science. This is for the school. Let's just go to the Potter's Field and get one of those bodies. Now, the Potter's Field was the place where they buried unclaimed bodies and unmarked graves, including quite a great many of the Confederate soldiers who had been brought there the days before. So we'll just make the walk. We're walking past the dead house here. And let me read a little bit. As the newspaper said, to the Cimmerian shades of the gloomy spot the twain now bent their steps. A ghostly grayish light, crepuscular and nebulous, had succeeded to the intense darkness of the early night. Overhead, detached cumuli, weird and fantastic cloud shapes, slowly drifted in from the lake. Southward lay the city's huge black bulk. To their quickened imagination, as the lake and shore and sky and sleeping city all seemed to be breathlessly watching them. Somebody was getting paid by the word. But this tunnel, of course, was not there just yet. This was still the old city cemetery, not Lincoln Park in those days. How would you like to be known as crepuscular and nebulous? Benjamin Franklin has a statue on both of my Grave Robbing 101 walking tour routes, both in Chicago and New York. And lived in London with a grave robber. They found hundreds of human bones in the house, in the building where he'd lived. He had a medical student living with him elsewhere in the building. But as they made their way out to where the baseball fields are now and managed to get themselves a corpse, but then they managed to get the corpse back to their carriage and started driving down a street that looked kind of like this. Kind of, sort of, only not quite this well lit. They ran into a couple of problems. One was they got stuck in the mud. One of the guys had to leave early. Then as they got closer and closer back to the school, some people started crowding around. Apparently it was a thing that grocery store early birds would hover around delivery wagons and try to get their groceries right off of the wagons instead of waiting for them to go to the stores. So here these guys are with a wagon with a corpse in it, and some people are like putting their hands in going, you got any butter? Any butter in here? Eventually they made their way all the way back to the school and then realized they had forgotten the keys. They were locked up, but one of them remembered, hey, remember the old Republican wigwam building where Lincoln was nominated and now they have concerts there? Of course you do. I know they're not doing anything right there right now, but I also know one of the windows is unlocked. So they slid the corpse into the Republican wigwam building. Next day, they got back to school, and the guy who had left early was running around saying, what are we going to do? We're in so much trouble. What are we going to do? It turned out the police had gotten wind that there was been some grave robbing going on, had already gone around to Rush College looking for the corpse. There was even a chance on the way back. They thought they heard some people from Rush who were going to challenge them to a fight. It would have been just like the Beat It video. They started to panic for a second and thought, wait a minute. They're not going to be looking for corpses at the Republican wigwam. So they waited out the authorities, retrieved the body from the wigwam, and shook their hands on a job well done, then went off to join the Union Army, which seemed like it would be easier than trying to rob another grave. Because they hadn't taken grave robbing 101. But we shall move on a little bit here. One other kind of grave robbing that we haven't really discussed yet is cranioclepty. That is the stealing of heads. Now, back in the 1800s, phrenology was still a really big thing. People thought they could tell all about you by the bumps and ridges on your skull. Now, often this was used for racist purposes. Like, this is Fowler and Wells' phrenological cabinet. The space is now a bar called Temple Court, one of my favorite cocktail bars anywhere in the whole entire world. Initially, they called that bar Fowler and Wells after the business that had been there. This is a place where you would go to get your head read. So, trouble is, Fowler and Wells publications tended to be obnoxiously, horrifyingly racist. Now, phrenology in and of itself isn't necessarily more racist than, like, palm reading, but very often they were using, like, the broader features of a skull to indicate that, you know, this ethnicity thinks this ethnicity thinks that. But there was also, like, the micro version that was very much more like palm reading, where they would go and look at the individual bumps and ridges on your head. So they could back up their theories, kind of, because they could at least claim that they were reading skulls of people like murderers, people who had been executed, drunks, people who were found dead in the gutter and had their bodies unclaimed. But the skulls of geniuses, the skulls of fairly famous people, commanded much more of a premium. There were a lot of stories about this. There was a story that George Washington's skull had been stolen, which is entirely possible. There are stories about Shakespeare's skull being stolen, which the official position at the church over in Stratford is that it's just sunk a little bit deeper. But people in those days would say, oh yes, I can read a skull the way other people would read a novel. There's a case here in Chicago on Lakeshore Drive is a statue of Emanuel Swedenborg, who is a philosopher. Well, he's a philosopher among other things. His story was one day he sat down to a giant meal, and God's self flew out of the heavens, and first told him to stop overeating so much, and then revealed all the mysteries of the afterlife to him. Swedenborgianism became really a fairly common religion, like Charles Volney Dyer, Swedenborgian. Daniel Burnham, raised in Swedenborgian schools, that has even said that his plan for Chicago was based on a map of heaven that is in one of the Swedenborgian books. That's something I should really look into, as a matter of fact, because you can see references to that online. Last I checked, nobody had actually found this map and compared it to the Chicago plan. But there is a story that, and this is actually a fairly well documented one, there are multiple first-hand accounts of this night. There's one night some friends were drinking together. And we're going to say that part, especially the drinking together part. After what must have been several drinks, they started talking about Emanuel Swedenborg, who was buried nearby in a vault. And one of them was saying, you know, that guy was so holy, I bet he hasn't decomposed at all. Another one said, no, I bet there's no body in there at all. I think he just raised up to heaven as soon as he died. So they argued about this. And they had some more drinks. I am guessing a lot more drinks. And then decided, why don't we go see what kind of shape the body is in? So they opened up the vault. When they did, a gust of gas came out and all the candles were extinguished. They had to go relight them and probably air out the place a little bit. Why is somebody buzzing me at this hour? Hold on a second. Hello? Oh, yeah. Why am I having a delivery at 8:43? I don't know. We'll find out in a minute. But all right. So they bust into the tomb, open up the coffin, and find that, yes, he is actually in fairly good shape until someone touched it, at which point it skeletonized very, very quickly. Now, this is something that happens. Once you expose a corpse to the air, everything just kind of disintegrates right away, even if it had been in fairly good shape. So his skull was then taken. For a while, there were a couple of different skulls said to be the skull of Emanuel Swedenborg out there in the loose. But this is the Phrenological Cabinet, the publication of Fowler and Wells. This is why they changed the name of the bar. There's hardly a page in this that doesn't say something just obnoxiously racist. But another case of a stolen skull happens right at St. Paul's, where a lot of the cadavers during the doctor's mob of 1788 were taken. There's some interesting stuff in here. There's a lot of these old gravestones like, as I am now, so will you be. There is a guy in there who was challenged to a duel via a book-length poem. I think we're going to have to cover a lot of this on Tomb Snoopers Season 2, Or I might cover some of the stories that I researched but didn't have enough room to really cover in great detail in Graveyards of Trinity Church and St. Paul's. Somebody knocking on my door. Hold on a moment. Just some visitor I mother tapping at my chamber door. Hey. Hey, what's up? Hey.
Yeah, I just got some legal documents.
Oh, okay.
Service for you.
All right.
Regarding your marriage.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, just read through and follow up.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. All right. Yeah. Interesting delivery. All right. So, all of this stuff, Sir John Temple is in there as well, but also is the grave of George Frederick Cook, an actor. This is probably the most prominent thing in here. George Frederick Cook was an actor. Here he is playing Richard III. Drank himself to death while on tour in the United States. He got stranded here during the War of 1812 and couldn't leave. He was buried initially in something called the Stranger's Vault. Now, the Stranger's Vault was... we don't really know what the Stranger's Vault was. I've gone and asked that, and even the archivist doesn't really know. The only references to it are of George Frederick Cook being in there. But eventually, a movement was made to have him moved to a proper grave. David Hossack, the old medical student who took a rock to the head during the doctor's mob and was later Hamilton's doctor, assisted along with Dr. John W. Francis, who would later be Edgar Allan Poe's doctor. And while they were moving the body, they helped themselves to the skull. Kind of made it known that they had the skull, and one night a little bit later, somebody knocked on John W. Francis's door and said, "So, I'm from the Park Theater. You know how that monument actually, the flame points to where the Park Theater was? Well, anyway, we're doing Hamlet tonight. We hear you got a skull." And Francis wrote about this himself, so as a story like this goes, it is remarkably well documented. And the skull itself is now at Thomas Jefferson University in Pennsylvania. So, all right, everybody, this brings us to the close of Grave Robbing 101. At this point, we always just have kind of a discussion, like, were grave robbers good guys or bad guys? I'm not sure I would want my sister to marry one, but they were, in fact, providing a valuable service that somebody had to do. Now, quick upcoming plug. We do have, for one thing, Architecture of Mysterious Chicago is running tomorrow night. And coming up very soon to talk about more of this stuff, we've got Tomb Snoopers. Season 1 will be launching in September. And not to mention, Mystericon is coming up as well. There's just so much to plug right now, but I don't wish to keep you with all of that stuff, so everybody please just hang on a second. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling you all to stay safe, stay strong, stay spooky. We will just hang out now like we always do. So, wrong button. Where's the thanks button? That'll do. All right, Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out, finish our drinks like always. Thanks, everybody.
Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
You know, there were some kitty sightings at the beginning. I will bring them back out in a minute. Miles is sitting over in his box here. Good night, Maureen. Maureen, good night. I have an idea. Yeah. Ember is sitting in her favorite chair. Martin, love that reference. Basement tapes reference yet. Hey, I'll bring Ember back over. You want a throne ride? Yeah. We'll take her in the Empress's throne. scratcher. But she just likes to sit in it half the time. When your Oprah's in an airplane ride, look at her. I don't know about shopping bag flights for her. I'll put you back down. Thanks for the Zell, Loretta. Do I get to sit? Yeah, there's places left to sit in here. I don't really sit on the scratcher. Cindy, that sounds awesome. And the boy... Miles is over here.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian.
Oh, now you come over, eh, Amber?
Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
If anybody got a screenshot of her riding in her litter there, that'd be very nice. Riding in her throne. The Empress. Say hi to all the nice people, Empress. She is a very cuddly cat. The kitties are getting along very well, yeah. I haven't seen them actually cuddling yet, but they hang out together. They play together. They've only occasionally hissed when they're fighting over the same spot. Usually the scratcher. Amber's off to get a drink. Miles placed the order for that box that came, yes. Time to get going, Molly, all right. I do want to plug again tomorrow, Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. That'll be an in-person tour.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her.
Yeah, probably not Whiskey and the Cookies. I got that tour going. I might be able to pop in for a second. The boxes of books are coming, yes. Thank you, Gene. You know, Laura, I've done it at the con a couple of times. It's perfect for the con. Doesn't tend to sell on con nights, though. I don't know why. But we'll be discussing all of what we're doing for the con shortly. All of the town, darkening, darkening, darkening along. Be yourself, Bob. All right, so thanks a lot, everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling all of you to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, do stay spooky.